This is A Geek Leader. Hey guys, John Rauda back with episode 81 of A Geek Leader podcast, and it is just after Thanksgiving, so I hope you guys had a wonderful Thanksgiving, as I did. I'm in the southeastern United States, so I fried a turkey, and it was awesome. If you haven't tried frying a turkey, you've got to. It's just delicious. But right now, the Christmas decorations are going up. We're going to shift gears away from that and talk a little bit about project management and leadership from that perspective. And today on the show, we've got Mike Burrows from the UK, and he comes to the United States quite a bit for speaking engagements and things like that. And he's the author of a couple of books we're going to talk about, but we're also going to talk about just the idea of change and how to lead people through change and the importance of project management when it comes to leadership. So hopefully you guys will get a lot out of this. And if you do, head on over to iTunes and give us a rating and review. That would be awesome. With all that being said, give it up for Mike Burrows. Good afternoon, folks. Today we've got Mike Burrows on the show. He is the author of Kanban from the Inside and Agendashift, his newest book. Mike, how are you doing?
I'm doing really well, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me to your podcast.
Mike, I wonder if you don't mind telling the audience a little bit about how you got started in technology and in project management and leadership and those kind of things that led you from your beginning of your career to where you are now.
Right, that's quite a long story. I'm that old. But, I was kind of almost born into it. My dad was actually a Fortran programmer back in the day. And he worked for a flight simulation company, Ready Fusion Simulation. That company sponsored me through university. I actually ended up working at a rival aircraft simulation company because my future wife worked for them. So I was working in fairly hardcore embedded software to start with. Then I got into software tools, so gradually migrated towards the software engineering world. Later on, I did some work in the City of London, working for a number of banks, and started eventually first as a contract developer and eventually as a permanent employee, and rising through the ranks, in a management career. I was at Swiss Bank, and then what that became UBS after its merger. Global development manager, fixed income securities. Left UBS in 2009, along with quite a few other people, as you may know, and became CTO for an energy risk management startup. So a little bit different from banking, but still, and there's still some overlap with finance. That journey, that late stage startup, 5-year-old company or thereabouts. My job was to help get the company in shape for some kind of corporate event, whether that be a big injection of capital or a takeover or a merger or whatever. That actually became the case study for my first book, Kanban from the Inside. I used the time when I was leaving UBS to get more engaged with the agile community and the Kanban community, to which I felt particularly attracted at the time. With the full agreement of my colleagues, that's what I was doing from day one as CTO. 18 months later, the company was successfully engaged in a reverse takeover. It merged with a much larger company. My MD became the MD of the larger company, and I was able to go off and do my own thing. So I did, first of all, Kanban-related stuff. Wrote the book. The book was the really a product of the values model for Kanban that I put together in a career-changing blog, 2013, introducing Kanban through its values. And that's kind of where I've been, sort of a track I've been following ever since. I mean, it's actually less and less Kanban now, but the change side of it, I've turned the dial up to 11. Still very interested in values. That's turned into an interest in outcomes. And what Agendashift is all about, and what I specialize in now, is how to introduce change, not by prescribing a set of practices or rolling out a framework, but by getting some agreement on outcomes and working out some different ways of achieving them. and doing that in a very hypothesis-driven, lean startup-y type of way. So I, as I said repeatedly in writing, so I can't be I can't anymore. I'm 53, and I plan to spend the rest of my career on outcomes, whether that's on the change side or the delivery side. And the next book I'm working on, Right to Left, is really about kind of redescribing lean and agile in a way that's all about outcomes and not about backlogs and process and stuff like that, but working backwards from the outcomes that we want to achieve when we're meeting the needs of our customers, users, and various stakeholders. So that's a potted history of me during my career, anyway.
Yeah, well, that's good stuff. When you got into, I guess, focusing on outcomes and getting buy-in from different users and the whole model and methodology, what was the shift as far as from a developer standpoint or from the team standpoint when you kind of tried managing different projects in a different way?
I think a key moment for me was working in the government digital space in the UK. I know that some of this is happening in the States now, so maybe you're familiar with it, but there's been some really exciting stuff happening in the government digital space in the UK. It has fundamentally changed. Instead of one supplier putting together a whole load of documentation for a new system, and another supplier building it, and yet a third supplier supporting it, and so on, suppliers 4, 5, and 6 getting involved in other ways, and the whole thing being a very expensive mess with systems that are very disappointing to its end users. We now have a system where projects will be halted if they're not serious about engaging with users, doing user research, understanding needs, and working iteratively to deliver evolving services rather than working to build a system to hand over into production. Obviously anyone who understands Agile will understand that's a really fundamental change. And it's very exciting that's happened in the government space. And in a way, if it can happen there, it can happen anywhere.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I worked for a telecommunications company in a previous employment stint. And when I was managing a web and mobile development team there, we had a shift between waterfall to agile development. And that was eye-opening for the users to actually be involved, because we had this process before where it was more like we would go gather requirements and then we would disappear for 6 months and then say, here's your product. Yes. And they were always like, no, this is not what we asked for. But having them involved and coming to to sprint plannings and all that good stuff, that was very eye-opening for them. And I think it was a huge shift in the company and how we did things.
I've been very fortunate in my career that I actually have never really worked on a waterfall project, and even some very big projects inside banks. We have found a way to build things incrementally. I just can't imagine working in any other way. It's been natural, to me for as long as I can remember. What's good now is that we have a name for it and we understand some principles by which we can achieve it, and that makes the whole thing so much more transferable, repeatable, and so on. I think what's exciting about government isn't just the idea of doing things iteratively, but it's about being really serious about needs. And the fact that your project can be halted if you can't demonstrate that you're serious about engaging with your users, you have a long-term plan to evolve the system into the future, so you never get into this is a project to be completed type of mentality. It's just hard to express just what a fundamental shift that is. And I think there are people that are working in environments that they think are quite agile that could still learn a thing or two from what's happening in that space.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. What kind of challenges have you seen as far as engaging users that may not be used to having that kind of engagement when it comes to technology?
Well, in the government space, the users are citizens, and there are, 60 odd million of them, and you stand a reasonable chance of being able to find, some that you can talk to. Obviously, you have to be smart about it, so that you can do things efficiently. So for the first project I worked on was a very well-regarded project called Carers Allowance, and we engaged through the charitable sector for people that worked with carers, people who care for sick relatives, the disabled, elderly relatives or whatever. Various groups that support such people. And so we found, we tapped into, the population of people that were actually very keen to see better systems than the ones that were there before. When you have systems designed by lawyers, they are very intimidating. And, I've witnessed some quite touching, quite moving, video footage of, people struggling with very intimidating looking systems. The new systems are just so much different to that. The wording comes from copy designers, not from lawyers, and content designers. And we work very hard to make sure that the right questions are asked in the right order, so it's very clear to people at the earliest possible opportunity whether or not this journey is going to be a successful one or not.
What are a few of those standard questions that you probably would start out if it was a brand new project? Or would it all depend on that outcome that you're trying to find?
It's at the stage that I joined the project, it was more about we would try prototypes on people, whether they were paper prototypes or web-based prototypes. And it was a kind of task-oriented style of user research. We would ask someone to achieve a particular task using the prototype, and see how they would do with it, and see if they could do that with a minimum amount of prompting. And also, you work backwards. Talking to them. Actually, there's one trick I will share. And that's the one of identifying the authentic situation of need. It's really helpful when you're talking about a particular feature or a particular user story, to understand the when and where of the user story, and not just the, what they would like and why they would like it. An example I give is my sat-nav in my car. I have a very sophisticated car. I've got a RAV hybrid car. The most sophisticated piece of kit I've ever owned. I absolutely hate the sat-nav. And my favourite example of its unusability is if you want to get a turn list out of it, you have to press a whole series of buttons, one of which is the settings button. That makes no sense to me at all. And then you think about, when would you want to see a turn list? And, one very interesting scenario is when you're leaving the motorway at 70 miles an hour, and you want to know whether you're going to be turning left or right at the next roundabout. When you're driving at 70 miles an hour, you don't want to be going through a ridiculous and difficult to remember sequence of operations to get something as simple as the next direction.
that doesn't seem very safe.
Exactly. So, I have this vision of, someone at Toyota City, going through a list of requirements and saying, tick, 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 yes, we've signed off the requirement. But no one ever asked them, to explain what do they think is the authentic situation of need for that feature. Extending that idea, just ploughing through backlogs of requirements and, mentally going tick, tick, tick is the way to build mediocre systems. And I'm sorry to go to put the sat-nav on my car as a mediocre system. So that's the trick, and the when and the where, the authentic situation of your story, and it brings the story to life. And it's a very simple but powerful technique.
It's one of those things where having a user actually sit in and use it and give you feedback makes such a huge difference, because the developer probably doesn't even, they coded it, they went through it, but they probably don't even realize how it's being used by the user.
Yes. I'll give you another couple of examples on Find an Apprenticeship, which is another government digital service I worked on. We found some really interesting things through talking to real users. So one example would be we found out that rather than doing things on a computer, things are done on a phone. And we even heard funny stories. a student would say, I would be using this in the classroom with my phone hidden under the desk, so holding it at arm's length below the desk. The thing needs to be really legible on a mobile. That was an interesting piece of insight. We would discover that for apprenticeships, for some people, they were much more interested in how easy the employer was to get to from their home than they were in what the employer actually did. And when you look into the circumstances of some of these users, it makes perfect sense. So things like location, transport links, all these other things, suddenly become a lot more important than ever you realised when you first, you make your own, perhaps middle class assumptions about what people are looking for in a system, and it's not until you talk to real people do you understand, how they're going to use it.
Yeah, I've seen that so many times when it comes to like developing software where, developers will see it one way, and as soon as we talk to the users, it's like, oh, we were thinking about that completely wrong.
Yes. I learned this lesson perhaps the most, brutally, back in my UBS days. I used to understand how trading worked from how our trading system worked. Then it was a shock to go down onto the trading floor and find that there were sticky notes, around people's screens. And the sticky notes recorded piece of information to make up for shortfalls in the workflow of our systems. And it's a bit humbling when you encounter something like that, and you kind of realise what your users are putting up with. You've got to see these things for real.
Yeah, I always would have my team at my last job do what I called field trips, where they would take little trips just to sit in shadow and We had a call center that we wrote software for, like the ticketing system, and just going there and sitting with the call center reps and seeing how they actually input ticket data. Was just mind blowing, because we thought there's only one way to do it. You just fill in the form, right? But no, there's many different ways of doing it.
So you remind me of two more ideas. I mean, again at UBS, we rotated every member of our department to spend a week on the trading floor, and in every case they came back, with more empathy for their users, but also they were able to teach things to our users that they didn't know as well. The information flowed in both directions, and our business was. I was worried as the manager of the department that the business would think of this as a chore, but they really invested it, and I think they got a return for doing it. Another thing you reminded me of was, again, going back to those government projects, just what a vital source of information the help desk was. When something is not working for a user, a citizen in this case, they'll call the help desk. And when you hear the same things time and time again, that's a sign that something needs to be fixed. So they're very valuable resource.
Yeah, definitely. What are some things when it comes to, like, you mentioned empathy as, I guess, one example, some things that a new leader that may have always been an engineer or something like that, and they're kind of promoted into management, and now they have to manage projects. What are some things that they need to learn, some skill sets that they need to have when it comes to dealing with the people side of managing projects?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. A couple of things spring to mind. The first one is to really temper any temptation to micromanage. If you've been micromanaged yourself, it's not a pleasant thing. And I've gone so far the other way towards self-organisation. And an illustration of that, I remember my first day in a new, reasonably senior role at UBS. And I had a queue of people turning up my desk, wanted to know what they should be doing next. And I thought, this is ridiculous. This is my first day in this department, and you're asking me what to do, what they should be doing. It transpired that that's how my predecessor worked. But I just said there and then, if this is how we're going to work, it's going to make me miserable, and it's going to make you miserable. Either on your own or within your teams, you're going to work some of these things out for yourselves. And then I worked with team leads to make sure that people were clear on what the priorities were and so on. The teams, were empowered to self-organise around things like holidays and support rotas and all those other kinds of things. But that gave me more time to, invest in, my direct reports as people and other team members as people, to spend more time understanding what was on the mind of the people on the business side and so on. Managing people's day-to-day work is not what you should be doing as a leader. And that was I'd already learnt that lesson, by that time, but it's a very important lesson to learn. What else?
Well, I think that right there is extremely important. There's so many people that they feel like they can't trust their team, so they feel like they have to micromanage. And one of the things that I always tell people is when you do that, you actually become the bottleneck for that team. The team can no longer, you don't have the bandwidth to grow your team anymore than what you can handle.
Exactly. Yes, exactly. I think another thing you learn, whether it's a leadership thing or it's just a maturity thing, comes with age. I cringe slightly when I look back at my younger self, and when I thought that technology was the main skill, and I'm sure I was guilty of looking down on people with other skills. And now that I know how hard things like sales are, for example, you learn to respect people that come from different disciplines. And if you look at successful, digital operations now, there's strong technology leadership, yes, but there's also product leadership, and that's a different set of skills. As things grow, there's the people side and the process side, the organizational side, the business side, the sales side, the marketing side, and so on. And there's a whole load of different things that are very rarely wrapped, in just one person. And even if it was in one person, that would scale horribly. So a bit of respect for the different disciplines is definitely a good thing to learn.
No, I think that is. I think it does come with age, but it's also one of those things that it takes experience for you to figure out. Because I used to be the same way, where I thought the technical skills was always the most important, and then I ended up getting assigned to a mentor. The mentor kind of chose me, who was the vice president of sales at the company that I was at. And it was very ironic that meeting with a salesperson, how can they mentor a technology leader? And but the things that I learned from him were invaluable. And I think that's the reason why I've accelerated my career, was because I learned some of those sales skills, the ability to be able to sell my ideas and my projects up to senior leadership. And there's just so many skills that I didn't have that he had, that when I met with him, I didn't realize how important and how valuable those things were. Yes.
I mean, it's just the whole respect for people thing, really, isn't it? So, different people have different things to bring to the party, and in general, the more diverse your team, the more capabilities you have, and that's something to be celebrated.
Exactly. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about what is Agendashift, and how is that different than, let's just say, Scrum or some other type of agile framework, or is it a framework at all?
Well, it's not an agile framework in the sense that Scrum is. I think the best two words that describe it, I actually thank Daniel Mesick for. He used them in the foreword to the book. And these are two words that we've been using a lot in recent months. And the two words are engagement model. So they describe Agendashift, and also other things like Daniel's open space and agility describe how change agents can engage with their organizations. That's the very basic meaning of engagement model. But we go further. We think it's very important for if you're working in the agile space, or the lean agile space, as I would describe myself, and you're engaging with the organizations, you've got to do it in such a way that actually increases engagement in the organization, not destroy it. We fundamentally believe that rolling out agile, pushing agile on people that aren't yet willing and ready to accept it, to embrace it, is just self-defeating. It creates more problems than it solves. If instead you can work with organizations to, present it as an invitation, as Daniel would say, as I would say, to work with them to facilitate some outcomes that they agree on, and then do what we as techies love to do: solve some problems. I mean, how are we going to achieve this outcome? Well, that's something that we like to do. You've already won most of the battle if you've achieved that, and it's a fast process, not a slow one. Once you've agreed what it is you want to do, people are ready to get on and do it. So around those sort of very simple ideas, each of these different models, have some basic structure. Mine starts with discovery. Some workshop tools to help put together, a sort of compelling vision for where we'd like to get to, and a simple high-level plan of how we think we might get there. But it's all very high level, all of it tentative to start with. Then we dig in and find out where the opportunities really are. We've got an assessment tool that's very deliberately non-prescriptive, but is very good at identifying opportunities, whether they're to increase transparency or to get workload under control or to engage better with customers, various areas like that. We identify the obstacles to those things, and then the outcomes that are hiding behind those obstacles, the outcomes behind those outcomes, and so on. What we're doing with a clean language based game that we devised, we're modelling a landscape of obstacles and outcomes, and getting people to start to think about what this journey is going to look like, what their priorities are, what their key sort of landmarks along the way are going to look like, and so on. And after that, as I said, it's just a problem-solving process, very sort of lean startup-inspired, hypothesis-based change stuff, a bit of A3, a bit of old-fashioned lean in there as well. And underneath it all, the rhythms, the feedback loops that sustain it. One of my little catchphrases is, it's all very well talking about cycles of improvements, but there's nothing inevitable about cycles. Unless you build into the organisation a desire for change and regular checkpoints on it, then change is going to be slow, haphazard, or non-existent. Mm-hmm. So that's Agendashift. It's not the only agile engagement model worthy of the name, but given the tendency for agile rollouts to be imposed on people, it's something we believe is worth shouting about and getting a head of steam behind.
Yeah, I think that's really good. I think being an agent of change is kind of one of those things. The skill sets are things that are missing in a lot of companies today. Even when you go through like a digital transformation or something like that, having that that mindset that is necessary, I think, for success. What's
one of the nice things about Agendashift is that we've proved that those skills aren't actually that difficult to learn. I mean, you can even try them in a workshop for the first time and get some useful business value out of the exercise. Whether you see yourself as a change agent or just a participant willing participant in the process. And it helps to change the language of the organisation. It helps people understand that to talk about outcomes rather than jumping straight away to solutions involves asking perhaps some different questions, but they're very easy questions to ask, and it doesn't take much practice before some of these things become habit.
Yeah, I think that's one thing that people need to understand, that it is something that you can learn it. It's not a. I know some people will say, "Oh, they just have that ability." Well, no, that's something that they learned. It was a skill that they acquired. It's not something that's innate.
Yes. I mean, the sort of 20th century model of change management seems to be about dealing with resistance, and I tend to think that if you're spending most of your time dealing with resistance, then you maybe should wonder whether you went about things the wrong way in the first place. And also the idea that change is a project as well is something I reject. We need if we want organisations to be agile, they need to be adaptable, and change needs to be a habit and part of the way that work is done. So it's part of the design of the organisation is the the ability to change.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. Whenever you run into significant resistance, that's, in my opinion, that's a sign that you didn't do the work up front to prepare, and to communicate and to understand.
And to ask, yes, exactly, to understand. That's a very good starting point.
Yeah, I think you're right. We didn't ask the right questions. We didn't. It's one of those things where you kind of started the project and maybe blindsided someone with what you were doing versus asking, getting feedback, and understanding.
Yes.
So what are some tips that you've seen along the way that could help leaders become change agents, that could help leaders whenever they're starting a project to do the right thing as far as getting people on board? What are some of those things that a new leader might maybe something that they won't learn in school or that they haven't learned yet on the job?
Yeah, there's a few things. Many of them we covered already. Understanding where people are now is important. Understanding the pain points that people have now, but also some idea of what people would like it to look like. It's I don't believe that change is just about tiny incremental changes from where we are now. Some idea of where we'd like to get to, something positive that people can look towards, that gives us some direction, gives us some alignment, gives us some motivation is important as well. The more that is put together by the people involved, then the more powerful it's going to be. So that's kind of what we're trying to achieve with our discovery tools. And then the next thing is just not to jump too quickly to solutions. It's in our industry and perhaps it's in life generally, we love solutions, we love quick answers, but it's important to create options and to create multiple options, work out which is the best one, work out when is the best time to exercise an option and so on. And we start to be a bit more proactive about shaping our future rather than just focusing on the one silver bullet that we hope is going to make everything better. As I said, these things need to become a habit, and over-investing in any one solution it might give you some short-term benefit, but it's not going to give you the long-term gain that we're usually looking for.
I think that's really good advice. I think there's so many people, especially us developers that write code. We want to write that one piece of code that's going to fix that one problem, and we can check that off our box versus thinking about what is the big outcome. I think that mind shift of changing your mindset to say, let's focus on the outcome, the end result, and not necessarily that one solution. Because it may not be a solution that you can write. It may be something that comes off the shelf that you buy. Quite.
And increasingly we see that a lot of solutions aren't entirely technology-based. And you've got to understand how people work, how business operations works, and so on, as well as how the technology is going to support them. The idea that you start by writing code, I think that idea is getting past its sell-by date.
Yeah, I think for me, that's one of the things that I've learned over the last couple of years, especially, is that a lot of the change doesn't have to be code; it can be process. It can be just taking a step back and thinking, what can we do with the tools we have today? We don't have to always build new tools.
Yes. I suppose related to that, one lesson I've learned, as do my own product development, is that I've learned the hard way never to build anything that I don't intend to test it for real, almost right away. I wasted too many months on features that I or nobody else was ever going to use. And now if I can't get, fast feedback on something, I don't even bother to start it. I'm wasting my time.
I think that's great advice. I've seen so many projects where we spend tens of thousands of dollars and tons of man hours building something that never sees the light of day.
Yes, yeah. There's a story about that in the first book, actually, in Kanban from the Inside. I describe how I stumbled on validation, and it was through frustration at us building things that weren't being used. And I insisted on a conversation at the end of each piece of development work where the customer would confirm to the developer that this piece of work is already meeting needs. I did that out of anger and frustration, but I suddenly discovered that having that focal point of validation at the end of the process actually fundamentally changed the way everybody saw the rest of the development process, and everything from testing, development, prioritization, working backwards from validation, changed quite noticeably as a result of our everyone's understanding that this is for real, guys. And if you're asking for something stupid, everybody's going to know about it. That was I was kind of blaming the business, but I came to realise that we needed to change our process so that we were working in partnership right the way through the process, and we were all completely agreed on what our ultimate goal was.
I think that's really good advice. So, how can people learn more about Agendashift and you and some of the things that you guys do and connect with you?
Well, that's very easy. If you go to agendashift.com, you'll find a number of things that you can use there. There's a resources page with a ton of free resources. We have a thriving Slack community. I forget how many hundreds of people are in it now, but we are sort of marching towards 1,000 people, I think. There's a LinkedIn group as well, with the same name. I think 1,500, 2,000 people on there. So we're still a young community, but that's kind of exciting because we are still we're still innovating, still trying things out, still failing occasionally. We have long been at a stage where it wasn't just me doing all the work. There are other people innovating things, trying things, and we're learning from each other, sharing our experiences, and so on. If any of that sounds interesting, then just via the website, you can join any of those groups, find out what we're about, download any of those resources, and so on. And you'd be very welcome.
Excellent. And I'm sure we'll send some people over that way. Any last pieces of advice that you have for young leaders or someone that's interested in becoming a better leader or a better manager, and some of the skills that you may have seen that can help them out?
I guess... So I would certainly look for. You mentioned, mentors. It's very useful to have more than useful. It's powerful to have a mentor. But even if you can't have a mentor, you can study other leaders. See what you admire in leaders that seem to, be working in the way that you would like to work, achieving the things that you would like to achieve. And if you're a reader, then read. If you're not a reader, then listen. There's some great audio books now by some fantastic authors. And you need to treat leadership as a serious discipline. One that you study just as you studied all the other work that you do in your professional life.
I think that's really good advice, and I can't agree with you more. That's what's changed my life as far as leadership is concerned, is getting a mentor and just consuming as many leadership books as I could and trying to put those into practice. So yes. I really appreciate.
They all contradict each other, of course, but you read enough and you will find some things that work for you.
Yeah, I think my philosophy on that is if I can retain 10% and apply 10% of what I retain and see what works out, that's good enough for me.
That's a win, yes.
I appreciate having you on. Thank you so much.
Well, it's been great. Thank you.